strings have like such a nebulous place in our culture now. I think they're used mostly to like fill up space in music, in like ballads and stuff and in pop. But they're kind of used in a way that you might as well maybe do it with a synthesizer, with a pad or whatever, or with plugins. The capacity of the instruments, of string instruments, is so broad. But they've been kind of relegated to that space. I mean, they're also used in like scores or soundtracks for movies or video games or whatever. But yeah, and not as much as they were explored during the classical period. I mean, they used to be sort of like the star of music. What the electric guitar became in like the 70s and 80s. I mean, they were for hundreds of years,
Yeah, totally.
And there was such a deep exploration of melody and rhythm with Bach and with Mozart. I mean, they say this all the time that everything's already been written, everything's already been composed, everything's already been heard, But modernity, or in the 20th century, it's interesting what started to happen with strings and with classical instruments in general. And it's that a bunch of composers started to explore sort of like the extremes of the instrument and the limits. And they started to use things that would usually be considered like peripheral or tangential. I'm just not in order not to just talk about music, I'll give you an example. I don't know if you know about this game called Heavy Rain. I think it came out in like 2009 or something like that.
Okay.
And it's like this, it's one of these games that is like decision based and it branches out depending on what you do. But it made use of the controller that I had never seen before. A controller which is usually pretty utilitarian, like pragmatic. You use the joystick to move around, or buttons to like take action or whatever.
Doors and stuff.
But in this particular one, it's like you could use your character to like turn a key or whatever, and you would have to move the joystick in like a circular motion.
Nice.
Or maybe shake it for something else or things like that. I think a friend was telling me in Metal Gear Solid, I haven't played that one, but then you get to a boss at the end and the game will like read your memory card.
Okay.
And will like tell you, it's like, I know that you were playing Zelda yesterday or whatever. And I think that's pretty interesting. There's other like horror games that for example, you can't make noise because the microphone on the controller, like say there's a monster like following you around, the monster will hear you if you make a noise in your living room or whatever. Okay. Things like that. I think in literature, there's not a lot of it, but for example, there's this book called House of Leaves, and it plays around with print itself in order to explore certain feelings or just to be creative with the format. Like for example, there's a character that has this recurring thought that is like disturbing him, and there's if you just look through the book, it's crazy, but for example, this specific page, there's that thought that is like printed out and it's like plastered.
Okay.
Like there's one sentence and another one, and it goes like that until it creates like a black cluster of print or of that thought. And I don't know that I would have gotten that feeling if it was just like written out, or if I would just read it like that. So there's other things, like for example, you have to read it against the mirror in certain parts, and there's like footnotes. Okay. At some point, one footnote is like so long, it's like 80 pages long or whatever, and it takes over the book.
Okay.
So it creates a bunch of frustration. You have to like change pages around a lot. So you become frustrated just like the characters in the story are. So going back to the strings, I think that's what a bunch of composers were doing in the 50s 60s and 70s, that they were exploring things that would be considered peripheral or utilities, you know, like the bow, for example. Like there's articulations that they would use, like striking the string with the back of the bow with the wood, or even playing it, you know.
Oh, with the wood.
It'll create like a pitch, nice. Sliding it over the string, you know, they would do other things, like, you know, you strike the resonant box with your finger or with the bow or whatever. Playing behind the bridge, or playing close to the bridge or close to the neck. Those all give you different timbres.
Yeah.
So they were messing around with all those things instead of just continuing on with maybe there was a depletion of creativity when it came to melody and rhythm, because a bunch of these guys, they were just doing textures, like these clusters that would last forever. Like Ligeti was just like obsessed with the static, the idea of something, of stasis,
noise,
of just like something that just is just continuous, you know. And he would do a bunch of crazy things. Penderecki as well, incredible composer of just like texture. And I think bringing those two things together can be very interesting. But yeah, I think my theory is that in the 20th century, all of these incredible things started to happen. This incredible revolutionary movement in classical music started happening in those years. But then, you know, Elvis came up, and Bob Dylan and the Beatles and Pink Floyd or whatever. So I think people's attention, and that was like radically new, and people's attention went to that, which is great. But what was happening in classical music in those years was also radically new. And I think it kind of strings got into like a deadlock, or classical instruments in general. And I think there's a lot there to explore. There's a lot to mix. Maybe there's not a lot to like find out, to discover.
Like innovate.
But when you like mix things, traditional things, like familiar things, with these things that I was talking to you about, like just like peripheral things that might be out of the norm. Really, you know, what can be perceived as new things can come up, you know. I think I learned a lot about strings from not doing strings, from focusing on synthesis, for example. I started getting into modular synths, and basically what you do is mess around with volume and pitch and timbre, but you have all these, like, it, you know, you have like one modular setup, and it's like this very complete instrument. But all of these things that I learned from modular synthesis, I think they can be done by a musician,
a human.
And it's like so much more organic. I mean, they're both interesting, and I love doing both of them. But taking those principles and adding them to the strings. The thing also is that articulations and dynamics and all of that wasn't used until around Beethoven's time. Before that, it was just like the notes and the timing, and that was that. I think once that started happening, you know, you can have like swells and stuff, and this like annotation of just like playing close to the bridge or whatever. And all of the things that I learned from synthesis, I think they translate to the score. In one way or another. Everything that I can do here, I can probably do it on a page on the score, and that's really exciting to listen to that, because you don't really know what it's going to sound like. The beautiful thing about strings is that you have all of these musicians that are playing one song, but they're all so different, and they all have different timing in their vibrato, or they all have like their own sort of like pitch flavor, you know, or there's all these like nuances that every musician has that when they're playing together, it's life.
Yeah.
You know, that's life. Like they clash against each other sometimes. Like that's why strings sound so thick.
Yeah.
Because the pitch is not specific. And that's why plugins to me are kind of boring sometimes to use because they're so exact.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but most of them are. And I think, yeah, that's life, isn't it? That's like
bunch of things happening.
Yeah, like, you know, imagine if all your friends were like the same person.
That'd be boring.
And you get that clash, you get that sort of contradiction between the players, and it's incredible. And you know, these musicians are just like, they're so capable. They dedicate their entire lives to this one instrument, years and years. And I think what happens a lot of the time is that they get invited to a session to play, and it's like they're just playing longs, normal, you know, and they don't change pitch. You know, they change pitch maybe like every couple bars, and that's it. They're just like a synth or something like that. And you know, I've heard a lot from like producers that record strings for like pop or whatever, and it's just like, you know, it's difficult, it's expensive, and they're not always like friendly or whatever. It's just like, well, you know, what did you put in front of them? You know,
completely.
Are these like incredibly overqualified musicians that you're just like having over to your studio just so that they can play, you know,
one or two notes.
4 notes?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting that just to as a composer or producer, to know what you have in front of you, to know the extent of what you can do. I get kind of paranoid sometimes about, because I play guitar, but you know, the tuning is different than strings. I get kind of paranoid sometimes that, is this part too awkward to play or weird or whatever. So I'll usually tune my guitar in fifths just so I can kind of get a feel of, is this okay? Is this like fluid? But even when I put something on the page that I'm just like worried about, you get there and the musicians are just like immediately like do it. And so but this piece is called Ascending Downward. And it kind of it's this neurotic sort of like acknowledgement of the possibilities of the amount of musicians. So they all have different articulations. They'll have different subdivisions and all of that. And it's sometimes they play together, but they also just like become scattered and diffused. And I think the contrast between those things of just like hearing them completely doing their own thing and then coming and being in unison, that to me, that's life. It's a beautiful thing to hear the individuality of each musician kind of come to the forefront and then kind of disappear become a part of one. But then, you know, it's so this oscillation between those two things. And it's an interesting little experiment. It's like really short. I think the recording was kind of you were there and it was you did the setup, but you know, we put a microphone for each musician, and that was really cool because we ended up spreading out all of the signals on the console.
That's right.
Yeah. So, you know, 23 different channels and panning each one of them differently and coloring each one a little bit just to like elevate a little bit the tone of each musician. And I think that's also like a thing of just trying to explore the extremes of the medium, which is I think that's our thing in the 20th and 21st century, is making use of things that might not be necessary because they might be considered peripheral. But yeah, so much interesting stuff can come out of that.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of getting out of my comfort zone. I didn't study music, you know.
Okay.
I didn't study mixing or anything like that. But it's such a joy to just explore those things and see what can be done. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess watching you in the session, I always thought it felt natural for you. You know, the composing and even in the mixing part, you were just, you know, on it, and it never seemed like that you were stuck or anything. So I think that felt very natural. And also the musicians, I remember they were expecting what you were talking about, like, oh, this is probably going to be like long notes and stuff.
Yeah.
And upon watching the score, they're like, oh, okay, let me get my pencil and like write some stuff out and, you know, ask the right questions, like, okay, you want this or this in this part or whatever. So I thought they were excited in the session.
Yeah.
Challenged maybe, but excited.
In that moment, I think it's like there's a weird mix of emotions. I think I every time I have like a studio string session, it's like I get sick the next day.
Yeah.
I just have to like be in bed because there's so much stress.
It's pressure.
I get so scared, you know, of being embarrassed or not knowing something.
Yeah.
And so just like the amount of preparation that I choose to do, I guess, in order to feel like I have a grip on everything, without being properly trained, it's really,
yeah, I can bet.
It's really draining. But it's that mixed with just like complete awe of just hearing the musicians play and just enjoying it and knowing that could never be replicated with on a computer. You know, it's so exciting to see that. But yeah, I think it's the first of many different works that I want to do.
Nice.
That are kind of classical, and it's nothing new. I steal so much from composers that I love.
Okay.
But yeah, just adding my take on what can be done with strings and or kind of just doing something that I would like to listen to. Yeah. And yeah, I think it comes out the 21st or the 21st of this month, and yeah, we'll see what people say.
That's right. It was a really nice process, the whole thing, the mixing. There's even a sub bass in there, I think.
Yeah, that's an old trick that a bunch of movie composers do. Just adding a sub. Nice. Because I think it's more because of the 5.1, 7.1 or whatever.
Like
you just send to the sub like a synth sub.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think since we recorded all of them together, there was no way to put up just the bass, you know, without bringing up other stuff.
Yeah, the other guys.
So just to isolate the bass, just like putting a synth in there.
Nice.
And following the dynamics of the regular bass.
It was a great experience because I'd never really recorded that many people, you know. I think that's one of the things that you were mentioning about the pressure and stuff. It's because of the number of people, I think.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of them. If you just have one guy in the room, I think it's a lot less pressure than 23, right?
Yeah, and this one was like 23 musicians, and it was done without practice. Like we didn't have rehearsal.
Oh, that's right.
Before, so you don't really know what you're gonna get, and you know you have to be. You have a certain amount of time that you have, but you also have to get good takes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's stressful, but I like it. I think I like working under stress. It can be cool.
Yeah, and I think it's rewarding when you see the end product and you hear it and you're like, yeah. Even if there were challenges and stuff, I think the end product, and it makes sense, all of what you were saying about these guys and these techniques that they were innovating with. I think they're really well incorporated into the song or the piece.
Yeah.
You know, with what you like to compose and write, but adding that extra flavor of, you know, like technical stuff, I guess. And
a bunch of that stuff is just like I listen to these guys and I don't really know. I don't know how to study scores.
yeah.
I can get a vague idea, but I've done it very, very little.
Okay.
So a lot of it is just like, this sounds to me like you would write it like this.
Okay.
You know, it's like sometimes there's like these, like a lot of these composers do this thing where there's like, you know, when you, and Ligeti talks about this, where you look over to the ocean and you see waves. Then, you know, it's like one comes up and then another layer from behind, and you have all of these like all of this movement.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like trying to do that. So the best way to do that is just like, you could just kind of put like random in there, just like, oh, just play whatever. But you can also choose to put a specific timing or subdivision there. So yeah, they're all experiments that I didn't know if they were going to work, but I like them. So.
Nice. I think it makes sense with the whole piece.
Yeah.
Really cool.
All right. Well,
nice.
Thanks for hanging out.